Hey everybody, welcome back to Verse by Kurt. My name is Kurt Knutson, and today we are starting Genesis chapter 1. So when we started chapter 1, I like to go through a little bit of the book sheet. So here real quick is the book. So, man, there's actually a lot we could talk about, but let's just write here, the book of Genesis. In conservative Christian circles, we believe that the author of this book is Moses. There's nothing really that indicates that it's Moses other than tradition, but otherwise we don't really have an author of Genesis. When you talk about the author of kind of all of the, what we call the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, also called the Torah. When you talk about those books, there's this thing called the documentary hypothesis. And what this is it's a idea that a bunch of different authors over time were responsible for writing the first 5 books. Now, I'm not a proponent of that. There might be some legitimacy to other hands, in the editing process of the book. And I would, I think that's fine. Or all of the books, which probably lends itself to this documentary hypothesis. But as far as a bunch of different authors and then one editor just stitches a bunch of authors together, I think is problematic. I think there's enough to indicate that this is a single author, Moses. But we can talk about that when we go through the whole book at the end. Genres, we have narrative, and it's supposed to be a law book. It's in what we call the law, but it really is mainly narratives. If there is anything else, there's some poetry and prophecy, but we will get there when we get there. The purpose is not indicated, at least for now. Themes, we'll talk about different themes, but this is the book. I have front to back, so we'll have enough for chapters with, I think, another sheet. We'll see. But that's that. Let's get into the book proper. So if you've watched my previous series, you know how I do this. But if you're new, what we do is we have kind of 4 sections here. And you can pause in front of each one of these. That way, I won't stop the video per se. Like I won't pause for you, obviously. But you can pause in the amount of time and you can write your observations before you see mine. And then I can talk through it. That'll make the study a little bit longer for you. I time these at 15 so you can just watch through them if that's what you wish to do. But yeah, if you're doing this, I encourage you to stop, do your own work. The whole process of this is to teach people to do this anyway, but you can use this as a learning opportunity of the process here. So what we'll do is you pause the video here, and then I will write my observations. And then when you unpause this information here, this who, what, when, where, and words will be, I will have on the sheet here. All right, so what we do first is we have our who's, and then we'll do our what's, our when's, our where's, and our words. So who's are people, what's are kind of circumstances or actions, when's are times, where are locations, and words are just wordplay, words that sound like other words, words repeated, different things like that. I just have a blank category because the who, what, when, where, and why is here, along with other things. All right, so who? We have God, obviously, Spirit of God, and then mankind, both male and female, are in here. What? I have a lot, because a lot happens. What created heavens and earth? Notice that's separate from the let's do this. Separated, light from darkness, water from below, from above. Okay, now there's a ton, there's 6. And notice just you've read this, hopefully, at this point. The 7th day is not mentioned, and yet there's 7 days in the week that we traditionally get from here. That is because God rested, but it's in the next chapter. I don't know why. That's just the way that it kind of works out with whoever made these. The numbering system of the Bible came way after it was written, so you can blame whoever did that. So 1, let there be light. 2, expanse in heaven. 3, the waters above and below. Dry ground and earth and vegetation, yielding seeds. 4, lights in expanse separate day, the greater light, and the night, the lesser, so the sun, the moon, and the stars. Living creatures and waters and above, creatures above, so birds and such. 6, living creatures and mankind. Whens? Obviously in the beginning. In the beginning of what is the question? Obviously in the beginning of, creation, so before all this. But God was already there. So the question that people have had in the past is there be a beginning before God? And the answer would be no. God does not need material start like everything else because he is immaterial. There are other immaterial creatures, meaning things that are created by God, but those are things that need a beginning. God does not need a beginning by definition. Day is a lot of days. First, and that's debatable. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Again, seventh is in the next one. That word yom there in Hebrew is a debated term because it can mean a period of time. So the question is, when did all this take place? Was it actually days or was it more? That's a theological debate. I won't necessarily have that here. Seasons, days, and years are mentioned, which is interesting given the fact that day is mentioned. Where earth, we notice that it's formless and void, and darkness over the surface of the deep is mentioned, but then it gets added to. There's dry land that happens. Waters, they get separated from above and below, and they get gathered into one spot. Heaven in the midst of the waters. And that's an interesting idea because that has led people to believe in what's called a firmament, which is like a shell over the earth. And, there's, if you look at different creation institutes, like I believe Answers in Genesis holds this or has mentioned it, that there used to be a firmament before the flood that then collapsed down. And that's because there's language in the Bible that suggests this, that flooded the earth. So it's a helpful thing to know when you break it down like this. Some words. I just put everything that gets repeated. Good, evening and morning, be fruitful and multiply starts to get mentioned. And then when it comes to mankind, subdue gets mentioned, which is interesting. And then reproduce according to kind. So that is a lot of information. I'm going to do the structure. You can pause here. There's a very famous way to structure this. I'm going to probably be no different and include it. You could just pause it here. Otherwise, you could just keep playing the video and I'll have mine. So let's look at this real quick. I know this is kind of a weird drawing, but there's been many of these that either have been in books or circulate the internet. So this is not anything new, but I just want to kind of introduce you to kind of how it pans out. So day 1, I have the D1 here. Verses 1 through 5 is light and formless earth. Then 6 through 8, you get the heavens get separated, and the waters above from the waters below. I don't have like a firmament here pictured, but I just have sky and sea. Then we have land and sea. Waters get gathered, and then dry land appears with vegetation. Then I have the stars in the sky populate for the earth. So the top is typically designated as realms. So light, air and sea, land and sea. And then for the light, you populate the light with objects that have light or reflect, as in the moon's case. And it's a bunch of stars. Then you have the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. So the air and the sea, air, sea, and then the land animals that populate the land and people. So that's verse 14 through 19, 20 through 23, and 24 through 31. That is the division of Genesis. It pays, I think, dividends to slow down and see what's happening, because especially doing it this way, you can kind of articulate what's happening a little bit more. That is the structure and the observation. let's move on to the interpretation, see how we can interpret this. This is kind of an interesting one to interpret, but let's work through it. So the goal I have is to take all of this information and go through the proper principles of interpretation, kind of distill it into a phrase. So why does this chapter exist in Scripture? Sometimes it's multiple stories per chapter. In this case, it's one big kind of poem, narrative poem, if you will, that is speaking of creation. And what's interesting is, if you do look kind of at narratively, and if you consider humans being kind of the people who will apply this, we are the reader, you will see that it seems like whoever wrote this wants us to know that God created everything. Okay, so he's above everything. He's not part of everything. Everything in the world is not different deities. These would have been the ideas of the time. Either God is everything, or there are different gods that are attributed to different parts of nature. This is strictly creator versus creation. And what's interesting is he puts mankind in charge of caring for it. You can think of Genesis in a weird way as a funnel. You start with the broad of humanity, and then it goes into Israel. We start to see a funnel into Israel. You also see this, I mean, you can extend Israel forever, but then you start seeing the same opposite trajectory in the New Testament, but we're not there, so we don't have to look at that right now. But we're going to start with the broadness of humanity. We're going to start with all of creation, everything, not just humanity, actually everything, but that humanity is going to get channeled into, the story is going to get channeled into Israel. So I think this is a good summary statement of what's happening here. God created it all and put mankind in charge of caring for it. Now, how do we take that and apply it to our lives? And that's going to be an interesting thing, because what we're taking is a descriptive poem and we're trying to prescribe something from it. And I think we can, but it takes a little bit of just putting ourselves in the place of the person in the story, I guess, if that makes sense. So pause here, you write what you think, and I'll write what I have. All right, so if you're new, what I typically do is, because of the Shema in the Old Testament and the Great Commandment in the New Testament, which are the same thing, we are told to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, strength. And in the New Testament, we're told to love our neighbor as ourselves. But I think this is a good jumping off point of how to love generally. Typically, obviously God, but just how we are to love, especially now with the Holy Spirit as Christians. And I want to do that more. So that's how I use my applications. And it forces me to think of more than one. Some aren't as good as others, but one of these is, typically what the story's about. So for heart, my love or relational component, I can love the earth by taking charge of it. And that sounds counterintuitive to some people, hey, the earth's not yours, man, kind of thing. And true, although take humans off the planet, yes, it'll thrive in a way, but nothing's going to be able to solve the problems of the earth if something does go awry. If you're familiar with the harm of animals and different things like that, you'll know there are certain things where if overpopulation happens, it can get really ugly really quick in the animal world. Humans a little different because we have ingenuity. We can solve problems, but animals not so much. They can only solve so much problem. Soul, I can worship God the Creator. Mind, I can know God created everything out of nothing. This term is in the Latin, it's theologically a concept is ex nihilo. And then strength, I can serve God by subduing the land. And really, like I said, taking charge of the land and doing that, that's what we're commanded as Christians. If other people don't like that, part of that love idea of, hey, the earth's not yours and stuff, it comes from a deeply Christian tradition. There are other tribal groups and different things like that have existed that come into the same understanding that we have of the earth's important for some reason. But we have clarity on that. And we can explain, especially with our lineage, why the earth's important. But we have to go back to Christianity to understand why. So that is what I have for Genesis 1. It's a lot, and this is very cursory. Some people, if you look at commentaries, often Genesis is super heavy, and then it gets lighter and lighter and lighter as commentaries go on. But this is what we have, and I will see you in Genesis 2.